At my graduation, as the room filled with applause and champagne flutes sparkled under the lights, I saw something that turned my blood to ice. My father, smiling, clapping, looking every bit the proud parent, slipped powder into my glass. In that moment, I knew my life was about to change forever. But instead of panicking, I made a choice. I would play along. Growing up, I always believed my family was picture perfect. On the outside, we looked like the kind of people you'd see in a holiday catalog. Smiling parents, two well-dressed daughters, a warm home filled with holiday lights and the smell of fresh-baked cookies. We lived in Charleston, South Carolina, in a pale yellow house with white shutters and a magnolia tree in the front yard. Our neighborhood was quiet, the kind where neighbors waved from their porches and everyone gathered for block parties in the summer. My father, Richard, was a respected businessman in the city. He ran a small but successful logistics company and often wore crisp suits even when he didn't need to. People admired him, called him reliable, and whenever we walked downtown together, he always bumped into someone who greeted him like an old friend. He had this aura of authority, the kind that made you want to trust him. My mother, Caroline, was softer in manner but equally admired. She taught English at the local high school and spent her evenings grading papers at the kitchen table, humming old jazz songs as she worked. Then there was my younger sister, Amelia. From the moment she could walk, Amelia was everyone's star. She had golden hair that curled naturally, a bright smile, and a confidence I never seemed to match. Teachers adored her. Neighbors called her the sunshine of the block. By the time we hit high school, Amelia was the varsity soccer star, president of the debate club, and a natural at winning people over. I, on the other hand, was different. My name is Claire. And while Amelia excelled at everything measurable, grades, sports, leadership, I lived in a quieter world. I sketched. I painted. I filled notebooks with drawings of birds, faces, and city streets. I loved getting lost in color and shape. My teachers said I had talent, and my art often got displayed in school hallways, but at home, it never seemed to matter as much. Dad clapped loudly at Amelia's games, cheering when she scored goals, hugging her tight after every win. When it came to my art shows, he showed up, yes, but his claps were polite, and his compliments always lukewarm. "That's nice, Claire," he'd say. Or worse, "Art is a lovely hobby. But make sure you think about a real career." He said it often enough that it became a refrain in my head. Mom wasn't as dismissive, but she wasn't protective either. If Amelia bragged about her achievements, Mom joined in with stories about how proud she was. When I showed her a new sketch, she'd smile briefly before turning back to the stack of essays she was grading. It wasn't cruel, but it was clear where her attention went. Despite that imbalance, I still thought of us as a good family. We had Sunday dinners together, laughing over roast chicken and mashed potatoes. We spent Christmases decorating the tree while old records played in the background. Dad would insist on taking family photos in front of the fireplace, his arm draped around Mom, Amelia in the center, me on the side, smiling as if I belonged. And for a long time, I told myself that I did belong. That the little slights, the dismissive comments, were just normal family dynamics. Every family had favorites, right? Maybe I was being too sensitive. When I got into college on a partial scholarship for art, I was ecstatic. It was the culmination of years of hard work, sketchbooks filled with late-night drawings, weekends spent painting instead of going to parties. Amelia congratulated me with a quick hug before launching into her own story about being scouted by a major soccer program. Dad listened, nodded, and told me again that art wasn't practical. But still, he said he was proud I'd at least earned something. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, torn between joy for my achievement and the nagging ache that it wasn't enough for them. Graduation became my goalpost. High school graduation wasn't just about a diploma for me, it was about finally standing on equal ground. I imagined walking across the stage, cap and gown flowing, hearing my name announced, and seeing Dad and Mom clapping for me with real pride in their eyes. I imagined Amelia cheering, for once not as the star but as my sister, supporting me. In those days leading up to the ceremony, the house buzzed with preparations. Mom ironed dresses, Amelia practiced her speech for an award she'd be getting, and Dad invited colleagues to the celebration dinner. I tried not to mind that Amelia seemed to be in the spotlight again, telling myself that this time, it was my night too. On the morning of graduation, the air was thick with summer heat. The magnolia tree outside was blooming, heavy with white flowers. I slipped into my gown, smoothed the wrinkles nervously, and for the first time, allowed myself to hope. Hope that the years of being overlooked would finally be replaced by recognition. Hope that maybe, just maybe, my father would look at me and see someone worth being proud of. At that moment, I had no idea how wrong I was. No idea how close I stood to discovering the truth about my family. And certainly no idea that before the night was over, I'd see my father do something that would shatter every illusion I'd ever clung to. The first warning sign came sooner than I expected. Looking back, I can't believe how easily I brushed it off, how much I wanted to keep pretending everything was fine. A week before graduation, Dad came into my room late at night. I was sitting at my desk, sketching the folds of my gown draped over the chair, imagining how it would look under the auditorium lights. He knocked once, then pushed the door open without waiting for me to answer. That was typical of him, a man who didn't believe in boundaries, only authority. "Claire," he said, his voice calm but edged with something I couldn't quite place. "I need to talk to you." I put my pencil down and swiveled to face him. "Sure, Dad. What's up?" He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "After graduation, you should think carefully about what comes next. Art school, well, it's not really a long-term plan, is it?" I sighed, already bracing myself. We'd had versions of this conversation before, but tonight felt different. There was an urgency in his tone, like he wasn't just expressing an opinion but delivering an ultimatum. "I got a scholarship," I reminded him. "I've worked really hard for this. It's not just a hobby." His eyes hardened. "Scholarships don't pay the bills forever. Amelia's going places. She's got her soccer career, her connections. She'll make something of herself. You?" He trailed off, shaking his head. "You've always been sensitive. A dreamer. That doesn't keep the lights on." The words stung as they always did, but this time they cut deeper. I wanted to argue, to demand why he couldn't see my worth. Instead, I swallowed the lump in my throat and muttered, "I'll figure it out." He studied me for a moment, then gave a tight nod and left. But the way he looked at me, cold, calculating, almost disappointed, sent a chill down my spine. It wasn't the look of a father worried about his daughter's future. It was the look of a man sizing up a problem he needed to solve. The second warning came at Amelia's awards ceremony a few days later. She was being honored for her achievements in sports, a whole banquet thrown in her name. As always, Dad was front and center, shaking hands, beaming with pride, introducing her to everyone as if she were royalty. I sat at a side table with Mom, clapping politely, pretending not to notice how invisible I felt. When I excused myself to grab a soda, I passed by Dad speaking to one of his business partners. They didn't notice me, or maybe they didn't care. "She's just unnecessary baggage," Dad was saying in a low voice. "Amelia is the future. We need to make sure she gets everything lined up. Claire, she's too fragile. Too expendable." Expendable. The word echoed in my skull. I froze, clutching the soda cup so tightly it crumpled in my hand. For a split second, I thought I might have misheard. But the smirk on his partner's face, the way Dad's lips curled into a satisfied smile, it was clear. I slipped back to my table, my pulse hammering. Mom asked if I was okay, but I just nodded, forcing a smile. What could I say? That I'd overheard my father casually referring to me as if I were a liability in his grand plan? That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the word expendable pounding in my head. It wasn't just favoritism anymore. It was something darker. The final warning before graduation came on the morning of the rehearsal. Amelia was practicing her speech in the living room, her voice confident and strong. Dad was timing her with a stopwatch, nodding with approval. I walked in holding my notes, nervous but excited to practice too. "Dad, do you think you could listen to mine after Amelia?" I asked hopefully. His face hardened immediately. "Claire, this isn't about you. Amelia's representing the family. You should just focus on walking across the stage and not tripping." Amelia chuckled, not unkindly, but the damage was done. My cheeks burned. I muttered an apology and backed away, retreating to my room. It was the smallest things, the cutting words, the dismissive looks, the whispered conversations I wasn't meant to hear. They stacked up like bricks, building a wall between me and the illusion of family I'd clung to for so long. And yet, even with all the signs screaming at me, I told myself graduation would be different. I told myself Dad would finally be proud when he saw me walk across that stage, diploma in hand. But deep down, I think a part of me already knew. The pieces were there, scattered and sharp. I just hadn't put them together yet. If I had, maybe I wouldn't have been so shocked when I saw him slip that powder into my drink. Maybe I wouldn't have felt my whole world collapse in an instant. Maybe. But the truth? Nothing could have prepared me for that moment. Graduation week was supposed to feel like freedom. Everyone around me was buzzing with excitement. Parties, photos in caps and gowns, plans for the future. But for me, it felt like walking on eggshells in my own home, every word from my father loaded with hidden meaning. The tension grew thicker each day. It started small. Dad began micromanaging everything about the ceremony. He insisted on handling the invitations, making sure all of his business partners and their families had prime seating. He checked and rechecked the dinner arrangements, barked orders at Mom about the decor, and reminded Amelia at least 3 times a day that her speech needed to represent the family's brand. And then there was me. Whenever I asked about the dinner, about what I could contribute, his replies were curt. Just don't embarrass us. Or, stay focused on walking across the stage. That's your part. Every time he said things like that, I felt smaller, as though my role in this family had been reduced to nothing more than a shadow. The worst part was how Amelia joined in without even realizing it. She was so wrapped up in Dad's approval that she started parroting his words. "Claire, maybe you shouldn't wear those shoes," she said one afternoon as we tried on outfits. "You don't want to trip. Just keep it simple. You know Dad hates when things get messy." I laughed it off, but inside, it felt like betrayal. Amelia and I used to be close when we were kids. We built forts in the living room, whispered secrets under the covers. But somewhere along the way, she slipped into the golden child role so completely that she couldn't even see me anymore. As the week went on, Dad tightened his grip in other ways. He demanded I hand over the contact information of my art professor who had helped me secure the scholarship. "Why?" I asked cautiously. "Because I need to vet the people you associate with," he said flatly. "Vet." As though my life, my choices, needed to be screened like a business contract. I refused, mumbling something about not having it handy, and his eyes narrowed in that way that made me feel like prey cornered by a predator. Even Mom grew distant. Normally, she at least offered small comforts, a pat on the shoulder, a soft word of encouragement. But that week, she seemed overwhelmed, retreating behind her grating and avoiding conflict. I'd catch her looking at me sometimes with something almost like guilt in her eyes, but when I opened my mouth to speak, she'd turn away. My friends noticed the shift too. Lauren, my closest friend since middle school, called me one night. "Claire, you've been so quiet. What's going on?" I wanted to tell her everything. That my father had called me expendable, that something dark was brewing beneath the surface of our family. But the words stuck in my throat. What if she didn't believe me? What if I sounded paranoid? So I just said, "I'm tired. Graduation stress, you know." She didn't push, but her silence on the other end said she knew there was more. By the night before the ceremony, I felt like I was unraveling. I sat on my bed, sketchbook in my lap, trying to lose myself in drawing, but my hand trembled too much to hold the pencil steady. Every sound in the house, Dad's footsteps, Amelia's laughter, the clink of glasses downstairs, felt sharp, like a threat. I tried to reassure myself. Tomorrow would be better. Tomorrow I'd walk across that stage, claim my diploma, and everything would finally shift. But deep down I felt it, the isolation, the walls closing in, the sense that I was no longer safe in my own home. And then, at the graduation dinner, it all came to a head. The banquet hall was elegant, draped in white and gold, chandeliers casting warm light over the tables. Everyone was dressed to impress, glasses of champagne sparkling on silver trays. Dad was in his element, shaking hands, laughing loudly, playing the part of the proud patriarch. Amelia glowed by his side, her medal around her neck, her speech folded neatly in her hand. I tried to blend in, to ignore the pit in my stomach. I smiled when people congratulated me, thanked them politely, forced myself to laugh at jokes I didn't hear. And that's when I saw it. Dad, standing near the refreshments, glancing around like a man with something to hide. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small vial, his movements swift, practiced. With a flick of his wrist, he poured the powder into one of the champagne glasses set aside for the toast. He stirred it subtly with his finger, then placed the glass neatly back in line, right in front of the spot where I was supposed to sit. For a heartbeat, the world stopped. The music faded, the laughter dimmed, and all I could see was that glass. My glass. My hands went clammy. My breath came in shallow bursts. This wasn't paranoia. This wasn't exaggeration. My father had just poisoned my drink. And in that instant, I realized the truth. I wasn't just expendable in his eyes. I was disposable. I should have run. I should have screamed. But instead, something inside me shifted. If this was the game he wanted to play, then I would play too. I sat down, smiled at Amelia, and reached for the glass as though nothing were wrong. My fingers curled around the stem, steady despite the chaos in my chest. When the toast came, I lifted it high, the powder swirling faintly at the bottom, and pressed the rim to my lips. But I didn't drink. Instead, as the crowd erupted in cheers, I tilted the glass ever so slightly, letting the liquid slip down into the potted plant behind me. My heart pounded, but my face never betrayed me. To everyone else, I was just another graduate toasting to the future. But inside, I knew the truth. I had just crossed a line I could never step back from. The game had begun. The moment I pretended to sip that poisoned champagne, I knew there was no turning back. My father wasn't just overbearing, dismissive, or controlling. He had crossed a line into something far darker. Whatever powder he'd slipped into my glass, it wasn't meant to scare me. It was meant to silence me. But the terrifying question was, why? The rest of the graduation dinner felt like a fever dream. My father beamed with pride as Amelia gave her speech, raising his glass to her brilliance. He shook hands with colleagues, laughed at jokes, and slapped backs like nothing was wrong. To anyone watching, he was the perfect father celebrating his daughter's big night. Meanwhile, I sat frozen in my chair, the image of his hand dropping that powder burned into my mind. I tried to play along, laughing when expected, nodding when people congratulated me, but inside I was screaming. My skin prickled with sweat, my heart thudded in my ears, and I kept glancing at Dad, wondering if he could see through my act. When the dinner ended, I excused myself quickly, claiming I felt tired. I hurried home alone, Amelia and my parents staying behind to entertain guests. In the quiet of my room, I paced, over and over, replaying the moment. I grabbed my sketchbook and scribbled furiously, not drawings but words. He tried to poison me. He wants me gone. I couldn't sleep. My mind spiraled with possibilities. Was it about money? Control? Did he think I would embarrass him somehow? Or was it connected to Amelia's future? I remembered the contracts I'd glimpsed in his study, documents that tied her future to his business dealings. Had I become an obstacle in his carefully crafted plans? The next morning, sunlight streamed in as if mocking me. Life in the house carried on as usual. Dad sat at the table, sipping coffee and reading the paper. Mom bustled around making breakfast. Amelia hummed as she checked her phone. Not one of them looked different. Not one of them hinted at the sinister act I'd witnessed. I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. Almost. But then Dad looked up, his eyes meeting mine, and there it was, a flicker of something cold, something calculating. And I knew. I hadn't imagined it. He knew exactly what he'd done. And he knew that I knew. That was the breaking point for me. The fragile illusion of family I'd clung to all these years shattered completely. 4 days after, paranoia consumed me. I checked every drink before I touched it, every plate of food before I ate. I avoided being alone with Dad, finding excuses to leave the room whenever he entered. My hands shook when he looked at me too long, and at night, I locked my door even though I knew it wouldn't stop him if he really wanted to come in. But fear slowly turned into determination. If he wanted to play a game, I wasn't going to be the pawn anymore. I was going to be the player. I started investigating quietly. One night, when my parents went out for dinner, I slipped into Dad's study. The room smelled faintly of leather and tobacco, his desk meticulously organized. I rummaged through drawers, careful to put everything back exactly as I'd found it. That's when I discovered a locked compartment at the bottom. After some fumbling, I found a spare key taped beneath the desk. Inside were documents, contracts, financial records, even personal notes. My stomach twisted as I read them. They detailed a merger between Dad's company and Amelia's boyfriend's family business. The language was complicated, but one thing was clear: Amelia was central to the deal. Her reputation, her future, her image, all of it was tied to this partnership. And me. I was nowhere. In fact, one line chilled me to the bone: potential liabilities must be removed to ensure Amelia's uncontested status. Liabilities. That's what I was. A liability. My hands trembled as I stuffed the papers back into the drawer. My father wasn't just willing to cut me out of his life. He was willing to erase me entirely if it meant securing his empire. The breaking point wasn't just seeing him poison my drink. It was realizing how calculated it all was. How coldly he had planned to dispose of me, like trash. That night, I stared at myself in the mirror for hours. My reflection looked hollow, my eyes dark and sunken. I whispered to myself over and over, "You are not expendable. You are not disposable. You will not let him win." But even as I said it, fear gnawed at me. Because if I stayed silent, if I did nothing, I knew he'd try again. And next time, I might not be quick enough to play along. The choice was clear. I had to fight back. And the first step was finding allies. I couldn't go to Mom. She was too entrenched in denial, too wrapped up in Dad's image. Amelia. She was still blind to the truth, clinging to the pedestal he'd built for her. That left me alone. Or so I thought. Because that very week, help came from the most unexpected place. Help came from where I least expected it. My mother's old friend, Julia. Julia had once been like an aunt to Amelia and me. She'd moved away years ago, but she returned for my graduation, sending me a quiet congratulations message afterward. When I didn't reply right away, she called. Her voice was warm, but perceptive, and within minutes she noticed something was wrong. Claire, she said gently, you sound like you're carrying a boulder on your chest. Tell me the truth. And maybe it was the exhaustion, or the sheer weight of holding the secret alone, but I cracked. I didn't tell her everything at first, not about the powder, not about the documents. But I admitted that my father was dangerous, that I felt trapped, that I feared he wanted to erase me. There was silence on the line, then Julia whispered, I believe you. Those 3 words made me burst into tears. Nobody else had said that. Nobody else had even noticed. We agreed to meet at a cafe outside of town. Sitting across from her in a corner booth, I finally told her everything, the champagne glass, the files in his study, the way he called me expendable. Julia listened without interrupting, her face pale but resolute. You need proof, she said firmly. And you need protection. You can't confront him blindly. If he's willing to go this far, you have to assume he'll try again. She wasn't wrong. That night, back in my room, I planned carefully. I started by buying a small audio recorder, slipping it into my pocket whenever Dad was around. I combed through his office again when he wasn't home, this time photographing documents with my phone. I even checked the trash bins, sifting through shredded papers until I found scraps of emails linking him to Amelia's boyfriend's family. Piece by piece, I was building a case. But sneaking around came with risks. One evening, as I quietly replaced a file in his study, I heard footsteps on the stairs. My blood ran cold. I shoved the papers back, locked the drawer, and barely had time to slide into the hallway before Dad appeared. What are you doing in here? He demanded, his eyes narrowing. I forced a smile. Looking for Mom. She said she left her book in here. He studied me for a long, tense moment before nodding slowly. But his gaze lingered on me, suspicious, and I knew I'd pushed my luck. That night, I called Julia again, my voice shaking. He's watching me. I can't keep doing this alone. Then don't, she said. We'll outsmart him together. With Julia's guidance, I began laying traps. I started acting more compliant around Dad, nodding when he dismissed my future, laughing at his dry jokes, even letting him believe I was pulling away from art school. Meanwhile, I was recording everything. His phone calls, his whispered conversations with Amelia about our family's reputation. The more I gathered, the more dangerous it became. He started asking pointed questions. Why are you always on your phone? Who are you talking to so late? He confiscated my laptop one afternoon, claiming it was acting up. My stomach dropped. Had he found the photos? But when he returned it the next day, nothing was said. I suspected he'd copied the hard drive. That was when Julia introduced me to her cousin Daniel, a lawyer. Daniel listened carefully as I recounted everything, then leaned forward, his voice steady but urgent. Claire, if this is as serious as you say, you can't wait until he strikes again. You need to expose him, and you need to do it in a way that he can't spin against you. But how? I whispered. He controls everything. Even Amelia believes every word he says. Daniel smiled faintly. Then we hit him where it hurts, his image. The plan was simple in theory but terrifying in practice. We would confront him publicly, in a setting where his business associates were present, where his reputation was everything. Graduation had already given us a stage. The next opportunity was Amelia's celebratory luncheon with his partners the following week. Slip the evidence in where everyone can see it, Daniel advised. Emails, recordings, contracts. Don't give him the chance to twist it behind closed doors. The thought made me tremble. Confronting my father openly felt like standing on the edge of a cliff. One misstep, and I'd be destroyed. But doing nothing meant waiting for him to try poisoning me again. So I agreed. In the days leading up to the luncheon, I worked with Julia and Daniel to compile everything. The photos of documents, the recordings of his words, the trail of lies tying Amelia's reputation to his deals. Julia burned copies onto multiple USB drives, handing one to me with a grave expression. Whatever happens, Claire, she said, you keep this safe. It's your lifeline. The night before the luncheon, I barely slept. Every creak in the house set my nerves on fire. Dad passed me in the hallway at one point, giving me that same cold, appraising look, and I knew he sensed something was different. But he didn't know how much I'd learned. And he didn't know that for the first time, I was ready to fight back. The luncheon was held at one of Charleston's most elegant hotels, a place dripping with crystal chandeliers, white linen tablecloths, and the kind of polished marble floors that reflected every step. It was the kind of setting my father thrived in. Powerful men shaking hands, women in elegant dresses, everyone sipping champagne and pretending their lives were flawless. For most of the world, it was a celebration of Amelia. She had just been offered a position on a regional sports committee, a stepping stone to national recognition. To my father, it was more than that. It was proof that his careful grooming of her image was paying off. He was at the center of it all, guiding her like a prized thoroughbred on display. And then there was me, sitting quietly at the end of the table, wearing a simple navy dress, clutching a small clutch purse with a USB drive inside. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure everyone could hear it. Julia and Daniel were there too, posing as distant relatives, their presence a lifeline. We'd rehearsed this moment for days. If things went wrong, they were my escape plan. Dad gave a toast midway through the meal. He stood tall, glass raised, his voice booming with practiced charm. "To family," he declared, his eyes sweeping the room. "To Amelia's bright future and the strength of bonds that hold us together." The irony was almost unbearable. As everyone clapped and drank, I slid the USB into the laptop connected to the projector at the front of the room. The plan was simple. When Amelia's highlight reel ended, the files would play automatically. A recording of Dad's voice, followed by images of contracts, bank statements, and the words that had haunted me: "Liabilities must be removed." My hands trembled as I clicked through the sequence. One mistake, and I'd expose myself too early. The lights dimmed, and Amelia's reel began. Footage of her winning soccer games, delivering speeches, shaking hands with influential people. The room erupted in applause. Dad beamed, soaking in the admiration. And then the screen flickered. The applause died. A recording began to play, my father's voice, sharp and undeniable: "Claire is expendable. Amelia's future depends on removing all distractions. We can't afford liabilities." Gasps filled the room. Amelia froze, her smile collapsing as she turned to Dad, eyes wide. Whispers rippled across the tables, business partners exchanging shocked glances. Before Dad could react, the next slide appeared, scanned copies of his contracts, annotated with his notes about silencing me. Then came the emails, referencing deals tied directly to Amelia's reputation. The room was silent except for the sound of the evidence unraveling his facade. "Turn it off," Dad barked, lunging toward the laptop. But Julia, already on her feet, intercepted him. "Don't," she warned, her voice low but steady. Daniel rose too, stepping between us and my father. Amelia's chair scraped loudly against the floor as she stood. "Dad, what is this?" Her voice cracked, the betrayal slicing through every word. He faltered, just for a moment, before slipping back into his mask. "It's lies. Fabrications. Claire has always been unstable, you all know that. She's trying to sabotage her sister." Dozens of eyes turned to me. My pulse hammered, but I forced myself to stand, my knees trembling beneath the tablecloth. "I'm not unstable," I said, my voice carrying further than I expected. "I saw him try to poison me. I found the files. He wanted me gone because I didn't fit into his plan." The room erupted into chaos, some gasping, some whispering, others pulling out their phones. Amelia stared between us, pale as a ghost. Dad slammed his fist on the table, his mask cracking. "Enough of this nonsense. Claire, sit down before you humiliate yourself further." But this time, his authority didn't work. One of his business partners, Mr. Hughes, leaned forward, his expression hard. "Richard, those recordings sounded very real. Are you going to deny your own voice?" My father's mouth opened, but no words came out. Then Amelia spoke, her voice trembling. Did you really try to poison Claire?" The silence was deafening. For the first time, I saw something flicker in his eyes. Not anger, not disappointment, but fear. He realized he was losing control, his perfect image shattering in front of the very people whose respect he craved. Security, alerted by the escalating tension, entered the room. Julia handed over the USB, calmly explaining that it contained evidence of fraud, conspiracy, and attempted harm. Daniel backed her up with legal jargon I barely understood, but it was enough. The last thing I saw before they escorted him out was Amelia, sitting back down in her chair, tears streaming silently down her face as she avoided his gaze. The man I'd grown up calling Dad was gone. In his place stood a stranger exposed to the world. And for the first time, I felt like maybe I wasn't the expendable one after all. But as the adrenaline faded, one thought gripped me tighter than ever. If this was the confrontation, what would come next? Because tearing down my father's mask was only the beginning. The days following the luncheon were a blur of headlines, police interviews, and endless questions from people I barely knew. Overnight, my father's empire, the carefully curated image of a successful businessman and devoted family man, crumbled like sand between fingers. The local news picked up the story first. Charleston businessman accused of fraud, family betrayal. Then it spread wider. Clips of his voice calling me expendable circulated online, paired with screenshots of contracts and photos of me sitting at the luncheon, pale but unflinching. Suddenly, I was no longer invisible. I was the daughter who had stood up to the man everyone thought was untouchable. But the attention didn't feel like triumph. It felt heavy, suffocating. Reporters camped outside our house. Strangers messaged me on social media, some offering sympathy, others spewing accusations that I'd ruined my family. I shut it all off, refusing to open my phone except for calls from Julia and Daniel. Meanwhile, Dad was formally charged with attempted poisoning, conspiracy to commit fraud, and financial crimes tied to Amelia's contracts. The evidence from the USB was damning, and when paired with Julia's testimony and Daniel's legal filing, there was little room for him to maneuver. For once, his charm and connections weren't enough. Amelia, though, she was shattered. She barely spoke to me in the days after, retreating into her room, ignoring calls from her coaches and teammates. One night, I found her sitting on the floor, surrounded by torn-up pieces of her speech. "You ruined everything," she whispered, her voice hollow. The words cut deep, but I didn't lash back. I sat beside her, silent, because the truth was, I hadn't ruined everything. Dad had. But Amelia wasn't ready to face that yet. Mom, on the other hand, surprised me. She'd always been timid, complicit in Dad's control, but when the police came to question her, she told the truth. She admitted she'd seen things, the favoritism, the dismissiveness, even the vial he'd hidden in his study once. She broke down crying, saying she'd been too afraid to stand up to him. For the first time, I believed her. Weeks passed. Dad was denied bail, awaiting trial. Our house felt both emptier and freer without him. I could breathe again, even if the air was heavy with grief and betrayal. I started spending more time with Julia, who became like family. She helped me navigate the chaos, reminding me I wasn't crazy, that my life was still mine to live. Slowly, I began reclaiming it. I threw myself into my art again, something Dad had always dismissed. I painted late into the night, filling canvases with everything I couldn't put into words: fear, anger, resilience. One piece, a portrait of a young girl tearing away chains, caught the eye of a local gallery owner. Within weeks, I was invited to display it at a community exhibition. The night of the show, I stood in the gallery surrounded by strangers admiring my work. For the first time in years, I felt seen for who I was. Not expendable, not fragile, not a liability. Just Claire. Amelia showed up too, though I hadn't expected her. She lingered at the edge of the room, watching me with unreadable eyes. When the crowd thinned, she approached. "I still don't understand," she said quietly. "Why he did it. Why you?" I swallowed hard. Because I didn't fit his plan. Because I wanted to live my own life. She nodded slowly, tears brimming. I wish I had seen it sooner. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was a start. As the months went on, Dad's trial made headlines. He was sentenced to 15 years in prison, his empire dismantled piece by piece. Former partners turned their backs on him, investors fled, and his name became synonymous with betrayal. And me. I moved out of the family house, renting a small apartment downtown with sunlight streaming through the windows. I filled it with plants, canvases, and laughter from new friends I met through the gallery. For the first time, it felt like home. One evening, Julia joined me on the balcony, sipping tea as the sun dipped below the skyline. She smiled at me, pride shining in her eyes. "You know, Claire, you didn't just survive him. You beat him. You took his power and turned it into your own." Her words sank deep into my chest. She was right. My father had tried to erase me, but instead, he'd forced me to rise stronger than I ever imagined. Now, when I think about the word expendable, it no longer haunts me. It fuels me, because I know my worth, even if he never did. My mission now is clear: to use my art to tell stories like mine, stories of survival, stories of people who refuse to be silenced. If I can inspire even one person to fight back, to see their value, then everything I endured will mean something. As I locked up the gallery after my second exhibition months later, I caught my reflection in the glass door. My head was high, my eyes steady. I whispered to myself, "You are not expendable. You are free." And for the first time, I truly believed it.